Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Amy Morin wants women to own their own power. Today, she'll tell us how. Amy, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Amy, you've written a book called 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. Why that unique title?
Well, it's a spin-off of my first book, which is the 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And after that book came out, I got lots of questions from women in particular who wanted to know, well, what does it look like to be a mentally strong woman? Because there's so many examples of strong men, I guess Navy SEALs or elite athletes who often happen to be men seem to be depicted as the epitome of toughness. And I talk a lot about how it only takes one bad habit to hold you back or keep you stuck. And so when it comes to building mental strength, if you want to work smarter and not just harder, sometimes it's better to just get rid of the bad habits that are holding you back, and then all of your good habits become much more effective.
Oh, I like that. In fact, I'm making a note on my notes here. It only takes one bad habit to hold us back. That's a great start. We always want at least 1 to 2 takeaways from every show, and you gave it to us in the first 2 minutes of the show, so that's great. Now, are women, just across the board, are some mentally strong? Like if we see a weightlifter, or a bodybuilder, you can tell they're vast, they're bigger than everybody in the room, and you say they're physically strong. Are there some women who are just mentally stronger and others who are mentally weak?
Well, everybody possesses mental strength to a degree, but some are certainly stronger than others. And I really wanted to know, what's the research on women in particular? And there's been studies on this, and 92% of women say, yes, inner strength is important, yet the vast majority of those women said, I don't know how to build it. And 71% of women said, if I just had a little bit more mental strength, I could probably move forward and reach my full potential. So I think people want it, they just don't always know how to build it, and it's not something we talk enough about.
And it really isn't, because I can tell you there's certain topics we will hear about on the show literally every third or fourth week. They'll come up even a part of a book or a seminar or the materials that a guest is talking about. But rarely do we particularly, in fact, I can't even remember that we talked about mental strength for women or anything like that. So you have hit a unique niche, and I think a very important one. You say there are 3 components of mental strength early on in the book. Could you talk about those components?
Sure. It's all about the way you think, feel, and behave. So when it comes to thoughts, it's important to think realistically. Sometimes we think, well, you should just be positive, but it's not about being positive or overly confident, because that can be just as detrimental as being negative or being so filled with self-doubt that you get stopped in your tracks. But it's about knowing how to reframe your thoughts when they're irrational, and we all have irrational thoughts sometimes. And then the emotional part is about knowing how do you manage your emotions in a healthy way. It doesn't mean you have to be happy all the time, but it also means when you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, you don't have to stay stuck in a bad mood, that you have some control over how you feel and having the skills and tools that you need to manage your emotions in a healthy way. And then the third part about your behavior, it's just about knowing, okay, how do I be productive? How do I take some sort of positive action? Even if you face a problem that you can't solve, like maybe a family member's health issue, you can still at least do something to make your life or somebody else's life a little bit better. And when you combine those 3 components, you have mental strength. And they all are interrelated and they play off one another. But the more mental strength you build, the better you become at doing those 3 things.
So think, feel, and behavior are the 3 components that we're looking at, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I just like to repeat them so we make it easy for our audience if they didn't get a part of it, or if they're trying to keep notes as I do as you answer these questions. Now, you say that measuring your worth against others is detrimental to a person's self-worth. But in our whole life, has the world been wrong? We get a class rank. We're told we're the best player, the best musician in the class or in the group or in the orchestra. Forever, haven't we always compared to the others, and doesn't society do that?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with having winners and losers. I'm definitely not in the everybody needs a trophy camp. I think it's okay to say, okay, my team won, or I was the best runner in the high school. But what you don't want to do is compare yourself to other people. Like, if I could only be as thin as that person, if I could only make as much money as my neighbor, that's when it starts to get unhealthy. You want to compete against yourself. You want to make sure that you're becoming a little bit better today than you were yesterday, as opposed to thinking I need to be better than my neighbor, better than my friend. And for women in particular, it's so easy sometimes to think that we're only as good as the way we look, or how much money we have, or the people we surround ourselves with. And it's all of these sort of superficial external factors. And when you measure yourself up against those types of things, it's really like building a house on an unsteady foundation. It's bound to crumble at some point.
And I think it's great you bring out so many of these points in your book. And women probably, and men too, have seen them, as I've seen some of them, but finally somebody verbalizes it, and it takes you to have to say it before I say, oh my gosh, I've seen that all the time, but I didn't quite put that into words. Now I know why so-and-so reacted that way, or why this happened, or why that turned out. You mentioned a study that found that the more time people spent on Facebook, the more likely they were to conclude that others, not themselves, others had happier lives. Can you talk about this and tell us what your conclusion is out of that?
Yeah, it's an interesting world that we live in now that we have the world of social media, and so many people are just giving us those little snapshots of the best moments of their life, their family vacation, their birthday party, their something wonderful that their children did. And everybody looks happy and wonderful and perfect. And the more that we look at those images, the more likely we are to think, yeah, see, that person's life is better than mine is. And so studies have linked the more time we spend on Facebook and the comparisons that we draw directly to depression. And actually, Instagram's even worse for our mental health because it's all images. And just looking at other people's highlight reel tends to play with our brains. It tends to convince us that we're not good enough. So I think I'm not against social media. I use social media, but I think it's so important to just be aware of the amount of time that you spend on it, how it influences how you think, and that what you're looking at isn't reality. That those same people who maybe had a wonderful vacation photo that they posted may have had a fight 5 minutes before that, or they're not as happy as they seem all the time. They have problems and struggles just like the rest of us.
I think that's a key word, what you said. It isn't reality. Even what they call on TV a reality show. None of my neighbors look like the Real Housewives of New Jersey or New York or Dallas or Atlanta. And I doubt that there really are some people like that. And while it's termed reality, maybe that's just a nice term for television and gets us to tune in. Let's put it that way. Amy, at this point,
exactly,
we'd like to remind our listeners that they're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan, and our guest today is Amy Morin. She's the author of 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. Amy, can you tell us, is there a website where we can find out more, and where can we get this book?
Sure. My website is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com. And my book is available pretty much wherever books are sold, including Target, which has a special edition of my book with a 14th chapter.
Okay. So you get the extra secret chapter in there, the 14th point, not just 13.
If you buy it at Target,
If you buy it at Target, okay. We have to talk after the show how come Target got that special deal, why they get that extra chapter. But you mentioned something in the book that I found very interesting. You say, when women compare themselves, women feel bad, but men gain inspiration. And I never even thought of that. And then I started kind of going back over scenarios in my life and said, oh my gosh, that's why she said this. And that's why I felt that way, or Peter felt that way. So can you talk about that, what that means, and explain how that affects women?
Yeah, in studies, they've looked at what happens, say, when women look at ideal-looking women and what happens when men look at ideal-looking men. So if a man's flipping through a fitness magazine and he's looking at all these muscular men, he's more likely to think, gosh, I could do that too. I could look like that someday if I wanted to. But when women, let's say a woman is flipping through a fitness magazine and she's looking at these women who have a wonderful physique, she's more likely to think, gosh, I'll never look like that. No matter what I do, I'll never be that good looking. And so for men, sometimes they gain inspiration from looking at those photos. But women, it takes a huge toll on their self-worth, their identity, how they think about things. It can create depression and anxiety, and it's really quite unhealthy.
And I found that so interesting because I probably don't have a muscle on my body, but just as you said, if I look at a magazine or an athlete, I'll go out and jog a little bit or do 20 push-ups, and I feel like I'm Mr. America, that I should be on the Muscle magazine cover. Obviously, 20 push-ups aren't going to change it. It's going to be years of work. But I guess that's the male view, that you can do that. And yet I see a lot of times with women, you'll say, oh, this is nice, and there's a resistance to it. And just a different attitude. And I thought it was just two different people. But as you point out now, that's the way women look at things and the way men look at them, and they're different, and just something we should be aware of. You also mentioned that the more comparisons women make, the worse they feel about their bodies. How can they stay away from this? Just avoid, looking at pictures of other women, or what?
Well, I think just, first of all, just being aware of how it does affect your mood. If you spend 10 minutes scrolling through Instagram, do you feel better or do you feel worse? And figure out, why am I following certain people, or why am I spending my spare time doing this? And for some women, it might be about setting limits on how much time they spend on social media, or how often they are flipping through magazines, because if it's not good for you, don't do it. And another way is to just get control of how you think. Pay attention to, what are your thoughts when you look at somebody else? Do you tend to think, gosh, my life is terrible and horrible and awful? If so, you just need to reframe the way that you think, because if you want to change how you feel, you need to change how you think and change how you behave. So the behavioral change might be reducing the amount of time you spend consuming those images, and the cognitive change might be saying, I'm going to change the way I think. When I start thinking exaggeratedly negative thoughts, I'm going to reframe it with something more realistic.
So we go back to what we talked about and what you said, the answer into one of the first questions: think, feel, and behave were the three components. And if we do that, we can change things. Amy,
yes, absolutely.
You made a great point. I think a lot of us overlook this. We see something, and we'll use social media, but it can be on TV or one of those shows, the talk shows, where a guest is on for maybe 12 minutes, and they talk about their new movie or their new show or the great trip they just took, and we think, what a wonderful life. But as you point out, we're only getting a small snapshot of someone's life. In that segment, 12 minutes. They look good, they're pretty, or they're handsome, they're well-dressed, they're smiling, everybody's happy about things. But there's a lot more to life than what we see when we just see the doctor or the successful accountant. They're going to have less family time. They spent years in school. They certainly have a lot of debt because they've spent all those years getting the degrees. And it gives us a false picture, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
That's it, exactly. And that we sort of build this story around this person, that this person is wealthier, that they're happier, that they have a better life than we do. And it's not a fair comparison. We're comparing apples to oranges when we do that, when we try to compare what we think somebody's life is to what our life is really like.
So I guess now, next time we see that person on what might be called reality TV or the talk show, or just the successful people who seem to be around the office or in the building we're in, look behind the initial snapshot, and there's probably a few black spots as well as the white spots.
Definitely.
Amy, at this point in the show, we would like to remind our listeners that you're listening to The Secrets of Success. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our special guest today is Amy Morin. She's the author of the book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. And at this point in the show, we're going to take a brief break on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College. We'll be right back.
I wasn't prepared to be a caregiver to Mom, but a little over a year ago, we realized she couldn't take care of herself without our help. And well, how could I not be there for her? I had no idea how hard it would be, and just what I would need to know. Things I never thought of, like how to improve her mood, and even for me, ways to stay positive. Luckily, I found the Caregiving Resource Center from AARP. It had articles about the basics that got me started, but also information about the hurdles I was facing in this new role. I could even connect with experts and hear from others who'd been in my place. I know this road we're on isn't an easy one, but I'm really happy to have the extra help for her and for me. Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving. Articles, tips, and tools to help you both care for your loved one and care for yourself. This message is brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Secrets of Success. I'm your host, Bill Horan, on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College. Today, our guest is Amy Morin, the author of 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. Amy, you mentioned, I think it's on page 22 or so of your book, that there are judgmental words. And could you tell us what these words are, and are they good or bad, or should we stay away from them, or should we use them?
Well, when we're comparing ourselves to other people, we definitely use some certain buzzwords, I think, that we should be out on the lookout for. So, for example, should or shouldn't. So maybe you think, I should be earning more money, or I shouldn't dress like this. But when you start making those assumptions, it sort of defines the difference between reality and your expectations. Just accept what is. Another one is when you start thinking, I wish I had more friends, or I wish I had as much money as my neighbor does, or I wish my husband treated me like her husband treats her. All of those sorts of things just waste a lot of your mental energy. And another one is when we find those words that end in ER. So if you say something like, my friend is richer, or my boss is prettier, my sister is smarter, those are signs that you're drawing clear comparisons. And often they're not even facts, they're just opinions. And when we do those sorts of things, when we use those judgmental words, we tend to tell ourselves this story about who's better or who's worse, and we get everything all confused when it comes to what's a fact and what's an opinion. That's a slippery slope.
I bet we do that. I don't know if any of your clients or people who may have attended your seminars kept a list, but I bet we do this a huge number more times than we would ever guess. Am I right?
Yes, and when people start to become more aware of it, they think, my goodness, I do this, dozens of times a day, or while I'm at work, I'm just focusing on that, and it's such a huge distraction. When people can recognize it and just start to practice, all right, is this a fact or is this an opinion? And they realize that a lot of their thoughts are just opinions, yet we cling to them as if they're 100% truth and that everybody else would agree with us.
And I think it can ruin our day in some instances, or certainly put a damper on the next 15 minutes or the next hour, get us in a grumpy mood. So if we can catch them, and it's basically should or shouldn't, I wish, and words that end in ER, such as so-and-so is smarter than I am, or richer, prettier, better looking, whatever it might be. Amy, you mentioned, and I found this very interesting, and it might be something that a lot of our listeners want to bring up at the next cocktail party they're at, or get together. Consider why you choose to surround yourself with certain people. I don't think anybody's ever mentioned that kind of a statement before, and we've been on for almost 31 years now. What does that do? Why do you want us, and what are we looking for in the type of people? Are they tall, short, fat, thin, smart? What are we looking for when we're considering these people?
Well, I think it's super important to think, well, why do you surround yourself with certain people? Is it people who make you feel better about your life? So, for example, sometimes people will surround themselves with people who are all struggling or who have a lot of problems, and it actually kind of elevates their status. At other times, people say, I surround myself with people who seem to be doing better than I am, because I thought it would inspire me, but ultimately, in the end, I just feel bad about it. And sometimes we look for people who sort of reinforce how we feel about ourselves. If you feel bad about yourself, you might find that you naturally sort of attract people that insult you or are demeaning. And so it's really important to step back every once in a while and think about this. Why do I surround myself with certain people? What sort of beliefs do I have that are being reaffirmed by this? I can't tell you how many women I've worked with who will say, for some reason, the only men I ever find to date are ones that are demeaning or belittling to me. And when it gets down to it, a lot of them had really low self-esteem, and they were just sort of looking for these people subconsciously who reaffirmed their beliefs that they weren't good enough.
I think that's a great question. I think for our audience, just that's something you can do on the work tomorrow if you go out and take a walk during lunch or whenever. Consider why you choose to surround yourself with certain people. And most of us only have about 3 or 5 people we choose, that we don't choose the person who might sit next to us at work unless we do have a choice about it. But why do you choose Mary or Joe or Jack for a friend? And is there something in common about all of the people you choose as friends? The only thing I'm fearful that we might get an answer we don't want to find out about, and then maybe we have to call up Amy and say, what does this mean, and how do we get out of it and get away from it? Amy, chapter 2 in your book says that mentally smart women don't insist on perfection. Now, I've often thought that coaches always say, play the better team. They will make you play up, so to speak, because you're elevating your abilities, or compete against better people, and you want to challenge yourself. Most of us are looking to go to the better college if we can. So why is it, do you say don't insist on perfection?
Well, there's a big difference between high expectations and perfection. And high expectations are healthy, and it's wonderful to challenge yourself. But sometimes people hold themselves into such high regard that they expect that they will be flawless, that they should perform without ever making a mistake. And when that happens, it becomes detrimental. It's difficult to finish a task if you think it has to be perfect, or you might not try something where you think that you might fail because you want to be perfect. And in those circumstances, perfectionism just becomes such a huge obstacle. But we live in a world where it's often touted as a badge of honor. People will say, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. They might even say that in a job interview like it's a good thing. But if you're truly a perfectionist, it's not a good thing. It's really unhealthy for you, and ironically, it actually makes you perform much worse.
So actually, that might be a relief for a lot of us. Don't insist on perfection. Do your best, I guess, and do what you can. But if it's not that score of 100, and if you're only a 96, or maybe for some people the best you can do is 91 or 85, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Amy, once again, would like our audience to know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success. I'm your host, Bill Horan. We're talking to you on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Amy's book is called 13 Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. It's by our guest, Amy Morin, Morin. And Amy, can you tell us that website where we can find out more information?
Sure. It's Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com.
And Amy, for our audience, if you missed part of the show, or you found some of these tips helpful, you want to know more, or you want to recommend it to a friend, you can go to nccradio.org and listen to a podcast of the show. So if you missed part of it, you can hear the beginning again. You can get some of these good ideas. Do what I do. I take notes all during the show, and even recommend it to a friend. If these are things that will change your life, it's certainly worth it. And if a half hour can start to put you on the right track, get hold of Amy's book, and let's get going on that track to success. Now, Amy, one thing I think we certainly all agree with, you mentioned in the book, women must look good whenever they're doing things, and it's going to take longer. So can you talk about that society just expects that of them?
There's so much pressure when you look at, say, advertisements, or if you pick up a women's magazine. It's all about, looking good and physically, and whether it's doing your hair, doing your nails, putting makeup on. There's the expectation that women enjoy shopping and that you should be doing a lot of the shopping. And studies will show that women tend to do much more around the house, from chores to taking care of the kids. And even though women are now in the workplace more than ever before, we really haven't changed that in the last 100 years when it comes to women's domestic duties. And yet, at the same time, when you look at time management issues or recommendations, there's all these tips for women on how to be more productive. Rather than telling them, gosh, you have too much to do, magazines, websites, articles are always telling women, you just need to manage your time better. Which is quite insulting when you look at how much work women are actually doing, and how many expectations they carry about what they'll actually be able to accomplish in a same 24 hours as men.
And I guess this is a sad fact of life, though, but you found that the women who don't invest time and money in appearance may risk losing their income or possible promotions. Has that been what your findings indicate?
Yes, which I think is a sad state of affairs, but studies do show that women who, don't look as polished as other women aren't likely to get the same promotions, aren't likely to earn as much money as other women.
So, I mean, I guess it's just plain old unfair, but that's one of the things you do point out, and I think it's true. In fact, I'm a fan of a lot of the medical shows on TV, and gee, all of the female doctors look like they just stepped out of world-class beauty contest competition. And I would think if you're doing the work of a doctor, it's kind of hard to worry about all the incidentals as well as running around and taking care of your own life. But yet, you barely see anybody who's less than almost perfect in the role of the physician that they show us on TV, at least for the women physicians. You list, I think it's on page 41, a lot of the downside of perfectionism. Can you tell us what those are?
Sure. So people who tend to be perfectionists actually engage in some sort of self-defeating behavior most of the time. So, for example, if I work with a perfectionist who wants to lose weight, sometimes they'll be successful for a few weeks, but right before they start to get closer to their target goal, they'll end up falling off the wagon, so to say. They'll blow their diet, gain the weight back, and then they're frustrated. But it's this cycle that perfectionism often leads to, sort of this self-defeating tendency where they don't do it on purpose. It's just something that happens because they carry around so much anxiety about, am I going to make a mistake? So then they eventually do. It's also associated with a higher risk of burnout, that athletes and students who tend to be perfectionists often don't finish school, or they don't end up going as far in sports because they expect themselves to be perfect, and when they can't measure up, they burn out. And as I mentioned before, perfectionists are less likely to try new things. They avoid anything where they think that they might fail. They have a higher risk of mental health problems, from anxiety and depression to eating disorders, and they even die earlier. How's that for a horrifying thing to think about, that perfectionists actually have a greater risk of death at a young age. They heal slower when they have heart attacks or if they have other health conditions, and we just know that it takes a huge toll on their mental health as well as their physical health. And then, ironically, they're less likely to be successful. And finally, that they have a greater risk of suicide.
Wow. That's a good reason. It made me glad I'm not perfect. I realize maybe my imperfections are saving my life and I'm going to live a long time. But that is impressive. And I think for a lot of people who maybe have been push and try, it's good to read your book and realize that. And also, I just think you put it so simply later on in the book. You say, there's no award for never failing. So the person who is a perfectionist, they either can't fail or they're not going to try something they might fail at. And there's no award for that. They just missed out on something in life, and it might be something that opened up new venues to them or a lot of happiness, but it's just not going to be part of their life. Amy, we want to thank you so much for being with us today and for educating us on this topic. Once again, I'd like to let our audience know our guest today has been Amy Morin, Morin. Her book is 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. And Amy, once again, would you give us that website?
Sure. It's Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com.
And if you missed part of the show, you can go to nccradio.org, look under podcasts for The Secrets of Success, look for 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do, and you can hear what Amy has to say and change your life for the better. Thanks so much for being with us today, Amy. We'd like to let our audience know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.